warned an exchange student about my perverted son, causing a rift in my marriage, but preserving her and my daughter's safety. I'm a 40-year-old woman with 2 kids, Liz, my 12-year-old daughter, and Toby, my 19-year-old son. I'll be honest, watching Toby become a perverted degenerate has been one of the most painful experiences of my life. From early on, my husband, who's 54, has spoiled Toby endlessly, especially indulging his increasingly disturbing interests. This included 18-plus movies and even access to my husband's old stash of Playboys. Every time I brought it up, my husband waved me off with, "He's a teenager, let him be," even as it became glaringly obvious that Toby's behavior was veering into seriously inappropriate territory. It reached a boiling point with our former cleaner, a young Asian woman I hired because we're fairly well off. Toby couldn't keep himself in check around her. He'd harass her, constantly making advances, until one day she smacked him across the face when he tried to lift her skirt. The audacity my husband showed after that still makes me furious. He wanted to press charges against her. I retaliated with a threat I meant with every fiber of my being. I told him I'd divorce him, and not a soul in our circles would be ignorant of what a pervert Toby had become. I made sure to give our cleaner a generous bonus for all she'd endured and referred her to a close friend for work. Then I hired an older man in her place. Toby sulked for 3 months, stewing in his own misery. As for myself, if you're wondering why I don't simply leave, I've been secretly saving up grocery money in a hidden account since Liz was born, originally planning on using it for a top divorce attorney once Liz went to college. But with everything that's happened, I'm realizing I may not be able to afford to wait. Looking back, I recognize that I was basically groomed by my husband years ago. He fetishized exotic women, he's white, I'm Latina, and now I see how Toby inherited the twisted mindset. Most of the people in our community know how I became trapped in all this, and over time, they've become more than neighbors. They're my safety net, the ones who keep eyes on Toby and keep him somewhat in line outside our home. He hates it, and he makes that clear. Recently, our neighbor welcomed back his former exchange student for a visit. Let's call her Kimmy. She's luminous, always bright, always smiling, waving at neighbors like she's the sun itself. It would be darling if I hadn't instantly realized how much attention Toby was paying her when they first locked eyes on my neighbor's front porch. Over the next week, Toby and Kimmy started talking for hours on that porch. We even invited her over for tea a few times, and Liz absolutely adored her. They'd gossip about fashion, anime, and Korean manhwa, 2 giggling girls finding kinship over things I barely understand. 2 days ago, we were having tea, me, Kimmy, and the neighbor's wife, when Kimmy surprised us by shyly asking if she could possibly date Toby. Time froze. I put my cup down, looked her straight in the eyes, and told her exactly the kind of man Toby had become, just like his father. I didn't sugarcoat it. I told her about what he did to our Asian maid, how Toby looks at women, and warned her he might see her the same way, even if he didn't seem to right now. I explained how my husband had once love-bombed and cherished me, before showing his true colors far too late for me to escape unscathed. My neighbor's wife chimed in, acknowledging she knew I'd tried to set Toby straight, but sometimes, nature is simply too strong to overcome. I let Kimmy know I'd have her back fully if she decided to date Toby, and so would most of the neighborhood, if Toby ever tried anything. Kimmy nodded, silent, but her understanding was clear. Since then, Kimmy has started ignoring Toby. This morning, she came by to pick up Liz for a shopping trip, and when Toby tried to greet her, she ignored him, just said goodbye to me, and left with Liz shutting the door behind them. Toby muttered a slur as he pouted, and at that point, I snapped. Exhausted, chronic migraines giving me no mercy, I couldn't help but retort, "And that's why I warned her about you." Instantly, I regretted saying it, but I was just so tired. The look Toby gave me, heartbreak and betrayal, made me steel myself further. I met his gaze and told him plainly, "I tried to make you a gentleman, but you and your father kept acting like perverted asses. If you want to blame anyone, blame your father, he let you become this way." Toby stormed to his room. Not long after, my husband texted me, furious, asking why I'd sabotage our own son. My reply was simple and direct. I was done with how Toby objectifies women, and if he'd been any semblance of a good father, I wouldn't have to see my own son as a pervert. We had our chance to fix this long ago, he wasted it by enabling him. Now my husband seethes somewhere in the house, Toby's barricaded in his room, and Liz and Kimmy are still out. I texted my neighbor's wife to ask if Liz and Kimmy could sleep over at her place. I needed to keep them away tonight. My neighbor, a big guy, offered to come over and mediate, to be a shield in case things got ugly. I said yes, grateful but trembling. Right now, my hands are shaking as I write this. I don't know what, if anything, will be left of my marriage after tonight. All because I told a kind, bright girl the truth about the boy my son has become. My husband's mad, Toby's mad, but Liz and Kimmy are safe, and at least for tonight, that's all that matters. Update 1. Toby is my son, a fact I realize I may have worded strangely before, leading to some confusion. From the very beginning, every attempt I made to stop any escalation in Toby's behavior was dismissed by my husband. Any punishments I put in place were swiftly reversed the moment he walked through the door. The feeling of helplessness just kept growing. After Toby's first expulsion from school, he's actually been expelled twice. I had him thoroughly tested for any mental disability. I checked for ADHD, ASD, OCD, and even BPD, but the tests all came back, he's neurotypical. No clinical explanation for the behavior. I want to make it clear that my husband has never been violent toward me or the kids. If he gets upset, he usually redirects that energy elsewhere, sometimes into chores or by finding a task to occupy him. But that energy never went into helping me with Toby, or backing me up. Looking back, I know some would say I was stealing from my family by taking spare change and small notes from the grocery budget after shopping. But I never took the whole budget, nor did I use the money recklessly. It was bits and pieces, here and there, a desperate little stash for insurance, not theft. And then there's the question that haunted me for so long: why haven't you left? Why didn't you do anything sooner? It took so many conversations, with my family, my friends, and a lot of painfully honest reflection, to finally see it for what it was. Liz and I didn't deserve this. We especially owed Liz a better life. So now, I'm taking action. I'm filing for divorce. I packed up Liz and we went back to my home country, framing it as a girl's time with her cousins. While there, I scheduled a virtual appointment and met with 2 different lawyers from the same firm. They're drafting all the paperwork. They also advised me to speak to local law enforcement. There's a strong possibility I'll seek a protective order against Toby and my husband. With everything that's happened, I'm seriously considering it. Leaving Toby behind hurts more than I can ever express. This tore me apart. But more than anything, I need to protect Liz now. The lawyers said I have a good chance at full custody, particularly if Toby stays with my husband. That means separating ourselves from them, even if it breaks my heart. We're still in my home country, and I'm laying everything out with my family. I even double-checked, Toby hasn't targeted any of his cousins. I had to know, both for my own peace of mind and for legal reasons. Right now, I'm holding up. I'm okay. But honestly, I don't know what comes next. Update 2. This update is, thankfully, much more positive, and I'm relieved to say that I won't be giving up on Toby. At the moment, I'm back in my husband's home country. I think some people assumed I'd take Liz back to my own country, but I don't intend to uproot her. What I really needed was time to look into legal matters and clear my head. I have a few friends in the neighborhood, and when one of them offered for Liz and me to stay at her place, which happens to be closer to Liz's school, I gratefully accepted. It felt like a fresh start was finally within reach. 2 days after making that decision, I served my husband divorce papers and moved Liz and myself out on the very same day. Just 2 days later, news reached me that Toby had been found outside of Liz's school. He was having a mental breakdown, screaming uncontrollably, and was quickly detained for trespassing. From what witnesses, the school, and even the police shared, he was completely falling apart. He was taken to the hospital for a psychiatric evaluation and placed on a 72-hour hold. During that time, I wasn't allowed to visit him. The nurses and doctor told me that my husband hadn't so much as tried to visit Toby or even speak to his doctor. That broke my heart. Toby was diagnosed with a mixed personality disorder. He displayed classic symptoms of narcissistic and histrionic personality disorders. The emotional collapse was triggered by me leaving, and when I was finally able to see him, it was absolutely gut-wrenching. He sobbed in my arms, telling me he had no idea why he was like this, and all I could do was hold him. I hadn't seen Toby cry that hard since he was a little boy. It gave me a small sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, he could still be part of my life. I sat in on his next therapy session at the facility, which was mandatory. He apologized for everything, but I had to tell him his apology, while sincere, came a little too late. Still, I told him I was glad he wanted to get better, but that I needed space. I made it clear that our contact wouldn't vanish entirely, just become more limited for a while. Someone suggested I could send him a voice message, and I think that's a brilliant idea, just enough to let him know I haven't given up on him. I also said that if he truly proves he's getting better, we could have a more open line of communication in the future. Currently, I'm working with his doctors to find the right facility, one where he won't be exposed to the harmful dynamic that would exist if he returned to my husband. I think a voice memo once a month, or a video call here and there, could be the right balance, a small reminder that I still care. In 6 months, maybe a year, I hope he'll have acquired the tools, coping mechanisms, and medication he needs. I've also been helping him look into online classes so he can start branching out again, taking a chance on education and giving himself a new lease on life. As for now, there's been no word from my husband, whether he's got a lawyer, or what he might be planning, I just don't know. But I am safe, Liz is doing well, and Toby is getting better. That's where things stand. I know now that I was too hard on Toby, and I plan to acknowledge that and sincerely apologize in my very first video message to him. So much has been put into perspective for me over the last few days. So while most of Toby's behavior wasn't just his fault, I can finally admit that my actions, and my husband's, played a part too. Update 3. It's been a whirlwind these past few months, and I've barely had time to catch my breath. After everything that happened, I decided to get a job as soon as I moved out. I needed something flexible, just part-time work, something that would let me save for a place of my own while still being present for Liz. Her school is in a lovely area, but that's made saving up for a nearby apartment slow going. Thankfully, the wonderful person hosting us has been incredibly generous. She insists she doesn't mind us being there, but I still make sure to cook for her and tidy up the house as much as I can. It's the least I can do after all the support she's shown. My gratitude is endless. Liz is thriving, which brings me so much relief. I've been searching for a therapist for her, somewhere she can express herself openly, away from the burden of sharing everything with me or her friends. With the divorce looming, I want her to have a safe place to navigate emotions she might feel uncomfortable talking through with family. She deserves that space. Now, about Toby. I can't put into words how grateful I am for all the advice and help I received regarding him. Our relationship has genuinely improved since his diagnosis. The progress hasn't been a straight line, far from it. It took us 2 months to work out the right medication dosages and therapy routines, but we eventually found our footing. In fact, we found a homing service that's proven to be a real turning point for him. Now, he lives in a facility where he shares a dorm, to each his own space, along with a communal area where he started to make friends his age. After taking some advice to heart, we compromised on a once-a-week video chat to keep in touch. Reports from the staff say he's been doing well. He's even enrolled in online spring classes for next year and keeps up with 2 therapy sessions a week, plus access to a counselor in urgent cases. Eventually, I hope he'll work through enough to cut back to just 1 session a week, but right now, he has a lot to unpack. Then there's my soon-to-be ex-husband. His lawyer seems to have been frank. Given the mounting evidence, especially about Toby's condition and several character witnesses, it was clear the courts would side with me, likely ordering child support for Liz. Rather than fight a losing battle, he decided to cut and run, beginning the process to terminate his parental rights to Liz. When I received that letter, it honestly blindsided me, but I do think, for once, he made the right call. Legally, his rights aren't gone yet, and he's granted supervised visits with Liz every 2 weeks, though he hardly ever shows, probably hoping the process goes faster if he stays away. As for dividing assets, my lawyer assures me that the court's likely to favor me, given the evidence of emotional, mental, and financial abuse. We never had a prenup, so it looks like a 50-50 split is in order, but at this point, I don't want anything from the house. I've already packed up my personal belongings and family heirlooms. The rest, he can have it. I just want to be done with him, even though I know it's never as easy as it sounds. Our next court date is in December. I can't pretend I'm completely okay. There are still nights where I wake up with a pit in my stomach and that old familiar dread. I do worry for Liz and Toby. But I stay close with my neighbors, having tea when I can and hearing their encouragement. Friends and family still rally around me. They remind me I'm doing the right thing, even on the hard days. Kimmy, my old neighbor, even sent over a card. She apparently recognized my story and her letter made me laugh out loud. If you're out there reading this, Kimmy, thank you for the bright spot. Life has settled, somewhat. There are still shadows, but for once, I feel like I'm doing the best I possibly can. Maybe someday soon I'll look into therapy for myself, but for now, I'm focused on closing the chapter of this divorce before I take that next step. Update 4. The court date finally came on one of those flat gray mornings that make you feel like the sky is made of old dishwater. I dropped Liz at school early, our neighbor drove her the last block so I wouldn't have to circle, and I walked into the courthouse holding my folder like a shield. My husband sat on the opposite bench with a face I know too well, the I'm not doing this face that always came right before the worst decisions of his life. It didn't move the judge. She read through the stack, took one long look at both of us, and said it plain. Primary custody to me, legally and physically. The supervised visits he never used would end once termination of his rights was finalized, which she was ready to grant. There would be a protective order for me and for Liz, including our addresses and places of work and school. The assets would be divided according to law. She was explicit about my entitlement to a share of retirement and cash accounts. She added a line about Toby's treatment, that any interference from either parent would be considered a violation. When she asked him to confirm his choice in terminating rights, he nodded once like he was signing for a package he didn't remember ordering. Outside, he tried to cut a path toward me, shoulders squared, and our neighbor slid between us as naturally as breathing. You did this, my husband said, an old accusation with a new crack in it. I told him he had done a lot of things, but this part, me and Liz walking away, was something I did for us. He stared at the pavement for a long time and then walked off without looking back. I wish I could say I felt triumphant. Mostly, I felt tired and very awake. Toby's doctor called later that afternoon to tell me he'd earned a short weekend pass for a supervised outing, a small reward he'd been working toward. He wanted to spend it with me, which is something I don't take for granted anymore. He came out in his jacket with the sleeves pushed up like he's still 15, but he held himself with a kind of carefulness I hadn't seen before. Over tea, he asked if I could help him do something right. He wanted to apologize to our former cleaner, in person, with witnesses, with boundaries, without excuses. I had kept contact information through a friend and I reached out. She took a day to think before agreeing on her terms. Public place, her partner present, our neighbor's wife present, no touching. We met at a busy cafe at noon, in plain sight. I've never seen Toby so quiet. He had written everything down, and I mean every sentence, and he read it with his hands flat on the table so they wouldn't shake. He said what he did, not what happened. He used her name. He named the harm. He didn't look to me for rescue when his throat closed once. He asked if he could step outside to breathe, then came back in and finished. She listened without trying to make it easier. When he was done, she told him that hearing him take responsibility mattered, and also that she never wanted to hear from him again. He nodded. I understand, he said, and he did. We left with nothing fixed for her, because that's not how this works, but with one very heavy thing placed exactly where it belongs. Kimmy came back for the holidays for a week. She showed up with a bag of funny socks for Liz and a face I always think of as bright weather. They ran up to Liz's room to try everything on, and I went back to stirring the pot on the stove because domestic noises make me brave. We ran into her again 2 days later by total accident. Toby and I were sitting in the clinic garden during his pass when she turned the corner with coffee. For a split second I felt the old panic slam through me. Toby said hi the way you say hi to a neighbor in an elevator, and then he told me he needed to stand up and walk once around the fountain. He did. When he sat back down he told me he was angry with himself for a feeling he couldn't control, and also proud that he let the feeling pass through without acting on it. I told him both could be true. He laughed in that watery way people laugh when something hurts but they're still choosing it. The house where Liz and I had been staying was warm and generous, but it wasn't ours, and after court I signed a lease on a small 2-bedroom that smells like new paint and old radiators. The first night we ate pizza cross-legged on the floor with the box propped against a stack of textbooks, and I let Liz choose the color for one wall in her room. She picked a soft purple that looks like dusk. We painted until our arms ached, laughing when the brush slipped and left a streak on my cheek that looked like a bruise for 10 minutes. When she fell asleep that night, it was the first time in years I stood in a quiet place and didn't flinch at shadows. He tried one last theatrical gesture, my husband, I mean. He left a plain cardboard box outside my friend's door with my name on it, then rang the bell and walked away. The protective order makes that kind of thing easy to deal with. Our neighbor called it in and the police logged it. Inside were papers he didn't want to deal with, a watch that used to belong to his father, and a letter to Liz with her name written too hard on the envelope. I didn't open it. I put it in the back of my closet for a day when she's older and decides for herself what to do with it. Maybe she'll tear it up unopened. Maybe she'll read it and feel nothing. Maybe she'll feel everything. That choice is hers. Toby started his classes, 2 for now, slow and steady, and sent me a screenshot of his first graded assignment with an A in the corner like a small flag planted in a quiet place. He also asked the staff if he could help in the communal kitchen a few hours a week, and now he tells me about learning not to burn toast like it's a magic trick. The weekly video calls have turned into bi-weekly coffees in the garden with a counselor nearby when possible, and every month I record a longer message for him. I did the first one late, after we moved in, sitting at the edge of my new bed with my feet pressed into the rug to keep me from floating away. I told him I loved him. I told him that love wasn't a permission slip to rewrite the past, and that I wouldn't be his crutch, but that I was here, and I believed he could keep choosing different, even when it felt like moving a mile just to get from one end of a room to the other. He texted a heart and then a picture of the fountain in the garden with a caption that just said, "Stayed." I finally booked a therapist for myself. I started talking and didn't stop for 50 minutes. The next night I slept straight through until Liz woke me up asking if we could go look at lamps, because apparently we are a lamp family now. I said yes. We walked to the thrift store and she tested every switch, and I watched light fill and empty and fill again on her face. It felt like watching a house turn its own lights back on, room by room, without anyone yelling about the bill. Update 5. We found a lamp shaped like a tulip with a shade so thin the light looks like warm water when it's on. Liz plugged it in on the floor of the store and said, "This one," like we were adopting an animal. We walked home carrying it carefully between us, and for a second I had the stupid, dizzy thought that this is what it must feel like to carry good luck with both hands. The next morning went sideways fast. I was walking Liz to school, early enough that the crossing guard was still adjusting her vest, when I saw him on the far side of the street. Hands in his coat pockets, head bare, like a man who thinks a cold day can be argued with. He lifted his fingers in a small wave that felt like a dare. I didn't make a scene. I put my hand up the way I'd practiced with the school, flat, not frantic, and the security guy by the gate stepped forward like he'd been waiting for a cue in a play. 2 minutes later a patrol car slid to the curb like a heavy book finding its shelf. He called my name once. I didn't answer. They asked him to turn around. He made a face like he'd bitten a lemon and then did it. Paperwork met paperwork. The crossing guard blew her whistle just a hair too long and then stopped, embarrassed. Liz's fingers were a fist in the sleeve of my coat. I told her we were going to be late to algebra in the most normal voice I could make, and we walked in together. Inside, the school smelled like pencil shavings and sanitizer and a little like oranges. I kissed her hair and my mouth tasted like metal. By the time I reached the sidewalk again, the patrol car was already gone. The detective on our case called me at noon to tell me he'd been arraigned for violating the order. "Nothing for you to do today," he said, which is the sweetest sentence I've ever heard from a stranger with a badge. I put my phone down and stirred soup like it owed me money. Toby's weekend pass was scheduled for the next day. For a second I thought about canceling. I didn't. He came with a staff counselor, a woman named June with a kind voice and shoes that mean business, and stood in my doorway like a tall question mark. Liz hovered in the kitchen pretending to inspect the tulip lamp, which wasn't even on. We cooked, all of us, clumsy and careful. Toby chopped onions too slow, but he didn't argue when June adjusted his grip. He asked Liz if she wanted more salt like she was a judge on a cooking show, and she nodded once, solemn. Garlic hit the pan and turned the air into a small good spell. When we sat down, he didn't take the chair closest to her, he took the one across from me, and when he finished his plate he asked if he could see her room. She looked at me and I nodded. She showed him the purple wall and he said, "It looks like the sky 5 minutes before it decides on night." My throat hurt in a stupid, sudden way and I busied myself with the dishes. June's phone buzzed halfway through our attempt at brownies and she stepped onto the balcony. When she came back she told Toby, very simply, that his father had been arrested. She looked at me to be sure it was okay to continue. He sat down on the step like someone had knocked the battery out of him and then, after a breath, he asked if he could go look at the fountain tomorrow. June told him there was another option. His father had asked if he would visit at the detention center. It was his call. He rubbed the heel of his hand over his eye, hard, then said he wanted to think about it. He finished his brownie like an assignment and then wiped the counter until you could see our faces in the wet. He decided to go. We met in a room with bad light that hummed like bees trapped in a jar. There was a table bolted to the floor. June sat beside the door. My husband came in wearing his own clothes and that expression he puts on when he wants the world to forget the last 15 minutes ever happened. He looked older in the hard light and I had the ridiculous thought that he'd need a hat. Toby didn't hug him. He didn't stand. He said, "Hi, Dad," in a voice I've never heard from him, not angry and not small. My husband started the old script, "This isn't fair, things got twisted, we could fix this if you just," and Toby held up his hand. Not rude. Clear. "I'm getting better," he said. "You can't come with me." The room went very still. My husband's mouth did that thin line thing that used to mean we were about to hear 3 weeks of silence. He tried again, saying my name like it was the problem. Toby shook his head. "This is between me and me," he said, and then he looked at June, who nodded once. We left with nothing warmed up for anyone else, just the heat of a boundary set down where it belongs. On the walk back to the car he asked if we could drive past the house where we used to live. I told him no. He took a breath that sounded like a winter door sticking and said okay. We went to the garden instead, the one with the fountain that thinks it's a clock. He did one loop, then another. He counted the tiles out loud and it sounded like prayer if you squinted. When we sat, he said he was angry and that he didn't want that to be a reason to be anything else. I told him he could be angry and also good. He nodded like it hurt. June drank her coffee like she does this every day, which she probably does. Liz's therapist had suggested we handle the letter from her father on neutral ground. We brought it to her office with the plant that refuses to die and sat on the low gray sofa where every cushion is slightly too firm. Liz opened the envelope with a plastic ruler because the therapist didn't have a letter opener, and we all pretended that wasn't funny. The letter was exactly what I expected and somehow worse. Memory played as a movie with him as the hero, a few sentences that tried to lay blame on the weather and on time and on my mood. Liz read it twice, then folded it along the crease like it had offended her and slid it back into the envelope. "I don't want this in my head," she said. The therapist asked what she wanted to do with it. She asked for tape. We sealed it shut like a tiny coffin and she wrote later on the front in block letters and then crossed that out and wrote maybe never smaller underneath. I don't ever remember breathing out that long in a room where I wasn't alone. Kimmy came by on a Tuesday with a bag that jingled like a pocket full of coins. She'd gotten into a program back home that made her eyes shine and she wanted to say goodbye before she left. Again. She brought Liz a ridiculous solar cat that nods in the sun and apologized for its face and then laughed at her own apology. We walked her to the corner and ran into Toby and June doing their loop. Toby said hi in the elevator voice again. Kimmy told him good luck with his classes like you'd tell a neighbor good luck with their tomatoes. Then the light turned and she let herself be carried away with the crowd. It felt mercifully boring. I started a job at the bakery 2 streets over, the kind of place that smells like sugar even when it's closed. The ovens are ancient and have personalities and the owner curses at them like they can hear. I stand at the stainless counter at 5 in the morning and press dough back and forth with my palms and it feels like holding something stubborn and alive and not dangerous. When I unlock the door at 7 there's already a little line of people pretending to stretch their backs and really checking their watches. I bring home the ends of loaves we can't sell and Liz eats them with butter and calls it dinner like a joke. We are becoming a lamp and bread family. I don't hate it. Toby sent me another screenshot, an essay with a grade circled in red and a teacher comment that said, simply, "You stayed with a feeling." He'd written about the fountain, of course. He called it a place that teaches you how to just be where you are without anybody clapping. He started volunteering in the communal kitchen and learned not to scrape pans with metal on metal. On his last pass he came over and fixed the loose hinge on the cabinet under my sink without anybody asking, like he was practicing not being the person who always needs the door held open for him. The judge stamped the final papers on the termination and the property split last week. A blue stamp on a white page that has more gravity than it deserves. My lawyer slid the copies across to me and I put them into the same folder I carried on the first day and thought about how much fits between 2 pieces of cardboard. I walked out into air that was trying to be snow and for once didn't look to see who was behind me. That night the heat clicked on with that old radiator rattle and for a ridiculous second I thought it was footsteps. Then the tulip lamp made its small lake of light on the wall and Liz yelled from her room to come look at how the purple changes at night, and we stood shoulder to shoulder and stared like tourists at a sunset we had painted ourselves. The building creaked in harmless ways. Somewhere below us a baby cried exactly once and went back to sleep. It felt like a house learning its new language, word by word, without anyone raising their voice. Update 6. The first real snow came at 4 in the morning like powdered sugar shaken out of an old sieve. I was already at the bakery, elbows deep in dough that sighed when I pressed it, when the owner looked up from cursing at the oven and said, "Your boy's here." Toby stood in the doorway with June and a knit hat that made him look like a lighthouse. He had a note from the program and his hands clean. I handed him a stack of trays and told him the rule for new people: you don't talk to the ovens like they're people until they talk back first. He smiled a startled little smile and set to work. It turns out he does fine with mindless repetition when the thing he's repeating makes a tower you can see. Metal, soap, hot water, squeak. June sat on a flower bucket and watched like a cat in a museum, not hovering, not far. At 6:30 someone banged on the front glass hard enough to make the bell over the door chime like it was afraid. Drunk or angry or both, a man in a jacket that didn't belong to this weather. He was saying words loud enough to pretend they weren't words, just sound. The owner's hand found the panic button under the counter like it had been a long time since they shook hands. I told Liz to stay home that morning because of the snow. I felt the relief like a hand over my throat. I asked Toby to step into the back. He didn't. He said, very calmly, "I can stand right here," and took one long step to the side so I was in front and he was behind and nobody was a hero. The man pounded once more and then the patrol car slid up like it knew the choreography. A minute later we were back to cinnamon and receipts. Toby rinsed the last tray and said, "I wanted to be the one who made him stop, like a confession." Then he held up his wet hands and added, "I didn't need to be." I told him that's the good kind of tired. He came back the next morning on time. No June, just a text saying she'd be 2 streets away if anyone needed her. He learned the oven's moods and stopped trying to read people's faces like they were mirrors. A girl his age in a red scarf asked for a chocolate croissant and he looked at me over her shoulder like he needed a cue. I told him the price. He said it. He handed her the bag without letting his fingers brush hers and then went in the back and counted to 50 by 2s out loud. When he came out he told me he felt like a puppy watching a squirrel through a window. "Good window," I said, and he grinned at the floor. The court set a hearing for his father's violation and then moved it again. Snow delays, a sick judge, the court calendar doing the slow shuffle. When it finally happened they didn't need me. His public defender tried to give the day a different shape and the judge kept reminding it where the edges were. He pled to the violation. Time served, probation, a program he'll hate and maybe finish. A new line on the protective order about third parties and technology and what counts as a knock on a door when all the doors are phones now. The detective called me afterward and said, "It's quiet now," which I know isn't a guarantee, but I put the phone on the counter and let the quiet sit in the room like something somebody bought me I didn't feel guilty about. Liz's school did a winter arts night in the cafeteria under the 2 bright lights that make everyone look a little honest. She had 2 sketches pinned to a trifold board, the purple wall at 3 p.m. and the purple wall at 9 p.m., and I swear it looked like 2 different planets. Toby got a longer pass approved and came with June, who folded her arms and blended into a pillar like camouflage. 2 boys behind us made one of those jokes that think they're a secret handshake. The old Toby would have spun and swung with his mouth. He didn't. He took his program card out of his pocket and handed it to a teacher like it was custom at the door and said, "Those 2. They need to talk with an adult," and then walked away to stare at a clay dragon with its tongue out. When the teacher nodded I felt the strangest relief, the kind that sits in your bones and tells all the old alarms they can go take a nap. The woman who used to clean our house sent me a photo from a park with gold leaves and a ring on her hand that caught the light like it was doing a card trick. I texted back congratulations and a photo of the tulip lamp because it was right there and beautiful for no reason. She sent back a thumbs up and then nothing else, a boundary like a neat line on a map. Toby asked if he could send a note and I told him I would ask. She said no, thank you. He nodded the way he nods when June tells him a rule he doesn't like that keeps his life from blowing away in a gust. He went out to the garden and counted tiles and came back in with snow on his shoulder like he'd been blessed by something small. A week later the program called me into a meeting that felt too formal for the room we were in. 2 chairs, a plant deciding between life and theater, June with a folder. "Toby's ready for an unsupervised block," they said, "trial runs." He'd earned it with stamps on every small calendar you could think of. He looked at me like I was a referee. I told him I didn't need to blow a whistle. He picked the same garden. The first day of his own time he walked to the fountain and sat on the low wall and didn't move for 20 minutes. He texted me didn't move and then on purpose and then sent a picture of the water not freezing even though it had every right to. The next big thing was nothing big. He came by on a Sunday to help me fix the bathroom fan that whines like an old singer and brought a screwdriver that belonged to no one we know. He took the cover off and made a noise that is genetic and then actually read the little diagram inside the casing. He didn't force it. He stood on the bad stool and when it wobbled he stepped down and got the good chair without anyone needing to make a speech about patience. He put the fan back and we both listened to it not whine anymore like 2 people holding hands without touching. Kimmy sent a video from a study room where everyone's hair looked better than mine. She said the solar cat on Liz's windowsill is infamous now because it nods during tests. She held up a small certificate that had her name spelled correctly, and I cheered in my quiet kitchen like an idiot at a parade where all the floats are competence. She asked after Toby, and I said he was learning to make baguettes behave and also to go outside and do nothing on purpose. She laughed and said that sounded like a degree I might actually use. The house keeps teaching us its noises. The radiator clanks and I don't go rigid. The neighbor's pipes sing and I know it's not footsteps. Liz leaves her sneakers exactly where my ankles will find them and I curse and then I don't. We bought a second lamp at the thrift store because apparently we've become people who buy lamps like souvenirs. This one has a switch that clicks loud enough to be satisfying, and when I turn it off at night it feels like telling a very obedient son to go to bed. At the bakery a woman came in with a stroller and an older kid who was bored on every surface. He wandered toward the back where the employee's only sign is less a rule and more a suggestion written in polite ink. Toby put out his arm at bellybutton height and said, "Hey, danger zone," like he was teaching a line dance, and the kid stopped. "Why?" he asked. "Because he was 5 and that's the law." Toby didn't say knives. He didn't say hot. He pointed to the tray stacked by the dishwasher like a steel city and said, "Because this is where the heavy things live," in a voice so serious the kid took 2 more steps back than he needed. The mother mouthed, "Thank you," and I decided he'd get paid, not just volunteer credit. The owner rolled her eyes at me and then at him and then at the register and then it was done. He looked at the slip of paper with his name and the numbers like it might be a trick and then folded it very carefully, and put it in the pocket inside his jacket and patted it once like a small bird you don't want to startle. He got a letter from his father. The program opened it and asked him what he wanted to do. He asked to read it with June and nobody else. Later he told me it was a lot of sentences built like ladders that leaned on nothing. He wrote back a single line, "Please direct any communication through my doctor," and sealed it without asking me to approve the words. I sat at my table with a mug of something that went cold and felt a strange gratitude for a sentence that wasn't mine to write. Liz asked if she could invite 2 girls over after school and I said yes before I remembered to check the calendar and the money and the mood. They came in like small storms and took off their boots and laughed at my tulip lamp and ate bread with butter like they had discovered the secret of staying alive. They went into her room and I stood in the doorway for a second watching them point at the purple wall and argue about whether it was more lavender at noon or more bruise at 8. It felt like a life I had to squint to believe belonged to us, and then I stopped squinting. On his last pass, Toby asked if he could go to the movies alone. The program approved the matinee with a seat assignment like a plane ticket. He sent me a photo of the empty screen and then nothing for 2 hours and I did not die. He came out into the afternoon with a paper cup and told me the movie was bad in a way that made him feel normal. He said there was a moment when he wanted to turn and say something to the girl in the row behind him because that's a habit he's trying to kill, and he didn't. He held his hands palm up to show me nothing had been done with them he wouldn't say out loud and then put them in his pockets, which is a trick I learned 20 years too late. I am getting used to the particular quiet of a house where nobody is waiting for footsteps for the wrong reasons. The tulip lamp hums, the fan whirs, the bread rises, the fountain continues to pretend it's a clock, and we keep showing up for the little jobs time gives us. Tonight I found a small burn on my finger I don't remember earning and it felt, for once, like proof of an honest day instead of a life I had to survive. Liz flipped the new lamp off with that loud click and said goodnight in a voice that didn't check the corners first. I stood in the kitchen and listened to the pipes and to nothing else and to my own breath, even the way you listen to a song you forgot you liked until you hear it again at exactly the right volume.